Thank you for having me, and thank you for that very kind introduction. Some very interesting synergies. It was very cool to hear about those when I arrived tonight. Sorted? Cool. So yes, I'm here to talk about the Commission on the Status of Women. But before I do that, I'd firstly like to thank you all for having me here tonight, and also thank you as well for the raffle that you really kindly hosted, which actually supported me to attend the Commission. So thank you very much to everyone who contributed to that. Now, without trying to make you feel like you wasted your money supporting that, I will be honest, when I arrived in New York, I really would have happily been anywhere else. And it's not because I wasn't excited and really ready to take on this interesting piece of work. It's because due to planning and logistics, I arrived in New York the day the conference started. After over 20 hours of travel, getting lost in multiple airports, I rushed to check into my hotel, get changed, and then make my way to about a 2-hour line standing on the pavement waiting to get my UN ID pass and swipe card. With a few hours of sleep and lots of jet lag and a temperature that was only a few degrees above zero, excitement wasn't quite enough to keep me going. My Google Maps wasn't working, I couldn't find where I was meant to be, and I was starting to get hangry. And for those of you who don't know what that means, I did have to Google it to confirm. It means a state of anger deriving from hunger. I'm sure it's something we've all experienced. But don't worry. As soon as I settled into my seat at the UN and began listening to the comments of the opening session, I knew I was in the right place. I was hearing the UN Women Executive Director, the Secretary General, the Chair of the Commission, and world leaders calling themselves strong feminists, calling out key barriers for women that are often ignored, and calling on member states and the General Assembly to boldly push back against the pushback we're seeing against progress. The Commission on the Status of Women is the second largest gathering at the UN every year, second only to the General Assembly. And every single year since it started, it's had the most New Zealand representation, so we have the most delegates both from our government and civil society. But before I tell you a bit more about my experience at the Commission, I wanted to talk about the road to getting there. I'm not sure I'd be able to pinpoint a single point in my life when I would have said that I became a feminist. And I'm sure my poor parents who have had to put up with my constant questioning of gender norms and frustration at being called bossy for behaviour that was acceptable by boys but not by me would probably say that it's been quite a while. But my first involvement into women affairs and promoting gender equality was in 2016, in my last year of high school. After being involved in some local not-for-profit work, I reached out to a girl in Auckland whose name was Alexia Hubertudo. She had just started Girl Boss, a program to empower women and support them to enter male-dominated fields, particularly science, technology, engineering, and maths. She had an in-school program where people set up their own clubs that were project-oriented to engage with these issues and to help make a change. They were currently only in Auckland, so I reached out to her and asked if there was room to bring them to Wellington. And within a few months we had one at Aotea College, we were working with the other feminist groups in other schools, and we were doing some really cool work. Girl Boss has gone on to help thousands of women across the country. Alexia's been able to meet the Queen and thousands of other things, so that turned out to be a really cool project. The next year I attended the International Youth Assembly in New York at the UN. This is focused around the Sustainable Development Goals, and anyone who knows about them will know there is one specifically dedicated to gender equality. So I was able to further engage with the work there. And last year, 2018, my main focus on progressing women's rights was through working with Prepare New Zealand, which is a Wellington-based charity. And the work I did there was around preventing emotional abuse and promoting healthy relationships among young women. And what I worked on in particular was creating an educational campaign with a bunch of other young women, and this was creating t-shirts which had a single rose on them. And the campaign was all about true love. So we wanted to sell these t-shirts to make money for the charity so that we could do the work we were doing, which is running workshops in schools. but we also created a big educational campaign alongside it about what true love was and what true love wasn't. And this started as a small scale idea. We were just going to sell them on our website, but then Irene, who runs that charity, decided actually we'll go for something bigger. So we decided that we wanted to get them stocked in every single Glassons store in the country. So over 50 stores. They're the biggest retailer in New Zealand. And within a few months, we did. Every single one. There was a big, massive table at the front of every store with big posters, and we sold thousands of t-shirts and got thousands of young women engaged in this conversation to learn about how they should be treated in their intimate partner relationships. And then that brings me to 2019. Well, actually in 2018 is where it started, was when I got involved with the YWCA. I actually applied to be on their board. I got through to the interview stage and had a really great conversation learning about the work that they did, both in their member associations and at a national level. And I didn't get picked for their board. Not because, well, maybe because they didn't tell me this at least, I wasn't qualified enough, but because they thought I might find it a bit too boring. So we put our heads together and tried to come up with something a bit more exciting. What could me, as a lone, excited young girl here in Wellington, where there wasn't a member association, do to help? So that was when we learned about these different meetings, such as the Ministry of Women's International Women's Caucus, where civil society and different NGOs can go along and bring perspectives. They also told me about the Commission on Status of Women in New York, where they have the opportunity to see the young woman. And this sounded a little less boring. So I happily accepted to work with them to support them to engage more people in their programs and also to represent them at the Commission. And it also happened that at the end of last year, I undertook an internship at the Ministry of Women. And this was actually unrelated to the Commission, but I got placed in the international policy team. And not surprisingly, the work they were doing was preparing for the Commission. So I was delegated the role of researching New Zealand's national statement, to help the Minister for Women construct it, which she was going to deliver at the UN, which she did with baby in hand. And I also undertook a 10,000 word research project on the theme, which this year was access to public services, social protection systems, and sustainable infrastructure. So not very broad or vague at all. So I set out reading expert reports to try and figure out what this actually meant. And I also researched the policies of about 20 different countries that the government might want to meet with to analyse the policies they had in place that did or didn't support this theme. So much of this research focused on welfare legislation. So for example, a positive piece of legislation or policy that did support this theme is our new paid domestic violence leave, which for those of you who don't know gives women who've been victims of domestic violence compulsory leave, or the employers must give them flexible working hours during this time. Other countries also have processes, for example, where generally benefit payments are done based on household income, but for lots of women who are in emotionally abusive relationships and don't have control or access to their own finances, they have options for different systems. Another example of social protection systems is pensions. So I did a lot of research into this. In nearly all developed countries, women have a longer life expectancy than men. Additionally, due to more traditional views of women in the workplace, women often weren't the primary earners, their husband were, or when a family had children, the woman would stop working or would move into part-time work. And the relevance of this is that if a woman lives longer than a man, her pensions and savings have to last longer. And for many countries that have work and personal contribution schemes, if a woman has worked less time during her life, this can impact on the amount of money she then has to live off in her retirement. So many countries take account of this. So for time that a woman is on maternity leave, part-time work, or flexible work due to being a primary caregiver, the government will not only give their normal contribution, but will top up the employer and personal contribution to be the equivalent of if they're working full-time, so these women aren't disadvantaged. Another positive example we have here in New Zealand is, for example, the reduced fees for children's doctor's visits, as women are often primary caregivers, and we know there are far more single mothers than fathers. So this has indirect positive consequences on women's ability to access public services. The third element of the theme was transport. So for many women's issues, this includes timetable planning to fit with the lives of women, and in particular safety, as well as the design of our transport systems. So one example is Japan, where they have female-only carriages. So these are often, obviously not compulsory, carriages on trains, which are designed to prevent sexual harassment. So to give you some context, in Japan, they have very few legal protections for sexual harassment. And even, I think many of you would be surprised that in lots of actually developed countries, our law is struggling to keep up with the modes of sexual harassment that occur, especially in public places. So recently, I think in the last few weeks, England, thanks to an activist called Gina Martin, has recently made upskirting illegal, which is where men would use a cell phone to take a picture up a woman's skirt without her knowledge on public transport. And obviously these things weren't occurring even a few years ago when people didn't have access to cell phones in the way they do now, so the legislation is struggling to keep up. But in Japan there is not as much legislation around that, and the social attitudes are very different. They obviously have much more crowded train stations, and generally people aren't as assertive. And for women, this not only extended to physical instances, but it's very common in Japan. I'm not sure how many of you have an iPhone, but you can do this thing called AirDrop, where you don't need to have the person's contact details, you don't need to be connected to internet, but simply via Bluetooth, you can drop a photo to any other iPhone in the room, unless they have it turned off. And people were often doing this to send harmful or explicit imagery to random women to make them uncomfortable. So these train carriages are a really great solution. Another good example is Melbourne, where this public safety advert is from. So this one puts the onus on the man to intervene in situations where we can see women are being made uncomfortable. So this woman in the back here, and there's also a TV advert which some of you may have seen. So this man was staring, I think also winking at and making this woman feel uncomfortable. So this man has stepped in the way to help protect her. Also in Melbourne, they actually did a really interesting research project to map the travel patterns and concerns of many women. This showed a few things. A key one being that women are often more included in our part-time and flexible time workforces due to being primary caregivers, and often public transport didn't cater to this. Additionally, due to having children with them and being more likely to be involved in domestic care work, women's travel routes on public transport didn't look like going to work during 9 to 5. They often had to stop off to get groceries or drop the kids at soccer practice, as well as making their way home. Safety was also a really big concern for women, not just for themselves, but also because they were more likely to be travelling with children. Many women admitted that they would actually travel to a different stop that didn't have an underpass, had more lighting, or was more likely to have either Ubers in the area or a bus timetable that meant they had to spend less time at the train station. I'll discuss a bit later some of these issues in New Zealand because it was actually something I was able to give a talk about while at the UN. Another thing I did before I actually even made it to the UN was to get on social media and ask young people, other young women, but also men actually, what they wanted me to take to the commission with me, if they had any examples of things that they knew were broken or what they cared most about. So you can see here are the pictures that I put up on my story with some text and questions, and you can see there they had about 542 views, and these are just some of the responses of what people said they cared most about or the issues they saw.